Think rest areas are just a harmless blip on a long drive? Think again. I've got 3 real terrifying rest area stories that will make you rethink every late-night stop you've ever taken. The first one is my own. An overnight drive to Florida, me half asleep at the wheel, a grim little rest stop, and a locked bathroom that turned into a trap I only barely escaped. The second is from a man who was on a cross-country road trip with his wife, 2 little girls, and a dog named Bilbo. What he saw in a mirror changed the whole night. The third starts on a dating app, a FaceTime that seemed to check out, a last-minute meet at a remote rest area, and a message later that sounded more like a threat than a goodbye. If you like true creepy stories, hit subscribe and tap the bell, because these are the kinds of things you can't unhear once someone tells them. I'll start with mine. I was in my mid-20s, naive, stubborn, and convinced that sleep deprivation is a character trait. I'd left Thursday after work, because that's what you do when you want to get somewhere by Friday, and you think 8 hours of driving is negotiable. I was heading to Florida to see my girlfriend. She lived 3 states away then, and I had an idea that driving through the night would be the most efficient way to do it. In practice, it was the worst decision I've ever made when it comes to sleep. Sometime between 2:00 and 3:00 a.m., my eyelids felt like they had sand under them. I caught myself drifting into that low-gear doze where the road becomes a tunnel and your reactions are a beat slower than normal. There was a rest area sign, just a white rectangle on the dark highway, and I remember thinking, thank God. I pulled off the ramp and coasted into the parking lot like a drowning person climbing onto a dock. The place was the sort of rest area you expect at odd hours. Empty lights, that cheap industrial smell of bleach, and people weariness. One lone car sat by the vending machines, its engine off, its red tail lights like smudges in the dark. I think it was a navy blue Chevy, but I'm not sure. I'm not good with car models at 3 in the morning. I shut off the engine and leaned my head back for a second, feeling stupid for being that tired. And then, like a good citizen, I decided to use the men's room before I got back on the road. The men's door was locked, not like locked for cleaning, locked like someone had put the key in the wrong place and left it there. I walked to the women's because it was open, and it was either that or pee into a bush by the highway. I know how that sounds. I was an idiot for choosing the unlocked bathroom, but at the time it felt like the only rational option. Inside, it was grim. The fluorescent lights buzzed. One of them flickered at the far end like a heartbeat. The floor had that tacky sheen of old coffee and worst mud. The smell was... I've struggled to put it into words. It wasn't just pee or bleach. There was something earthy and wet, like rain-soaked boots left in a car for days. I noticed it and thought, okay, gross, get in and get out. I took care of what I needed, then washed my hands. I remember standing there at the sink, thinking about how dumb some of my decisions had been that week. Staying out late with friends, not checking the oil, the usual adult nonsense, and I let myself slide into a half-laugh at my own life. Outside somewhere, a noise, metal on metal, made me look up. A knock? Another door? I couldn't tell. Then there was knocking on the other side of the wall. It was loud enough to be purposeful, not like someone dropping a paper towel. Hard, aggressive, maybe with the heel of a hand. It came in 2 sets, then a pause, then a hurried sequence that sounded like impatience. I froze. For the stupidest reasons, I told myself nothing. Maybe someone had their keys stuck. Maybe the other person was drunk. Maybe... My practical brain tried to give me options. My spine didn't accept those options. I stepped out of the stall and saw, through the open doorway that led to the loop between the men's and women's rooms, 2 sets of muddy footprints on the concrete. They were fresh, dark, and they led from the men's side to the women's. One set was bigger, deeper. Between the sets leading back to the men's room were smudges that looked like someone had slid their shoes when they walked. There was an extra car parked closer now, too close, beside the one I'd noticed when I arrived. I hadn't seen it pull in. I ducked back into a stall and closed the door. My hands went cold. I told myself to breathe slow, to think, to not make any sudden moves. I'm not proud of it, but I remember thinking, if someone wanted to hurt me, I should be out of sight of the doorway. I didn't want to be the person greeting whoever that was, so I crouched on the toilet seat, which is already an absurd angle for being in a bathroom, and tried to be quiet. Then the sound of a lock clicked. Not outside the building. Inside, the bathroom door swung shut and the big metal latch slid into place. It sounded like a closing curtain. I could hear movement. Footsteps, perhaps someone moving between stalls. A stall door right next to mine scraped closed, then silence. My heart went pound pause, pound pause. The adrenaline was a bright light. I considered unlocking my stall and running out the women's door. But what if the person blocked that way? What if someone was waiting outside? And since when do I have the muscle memory for perfect escape plans in bathrooms? A voice, low, close enough that I could hear the breath, said something muffled through the stall wall. I couldn't make it out. Then, unmistakably, a man's voice on the other side of the bathroom. "You okay in there?" It was casual, the kind of tone a stranger uses when they want to sound non-threatening. Maybe he was checking on someone who was hurt. Maybe he wasn't. I whispered back, because sometimes that's the only thing you can do. "Yeah." My voice sounded tiny. Nothing happened for a moment. Then the stall next to me, right beside me, made a sound like someone padlocked something and the latch moved. I heard the man's shuffling shoes draw closer. He moved the stall wall like he was making sure, then sat down. The sound of his weight on the seat creaked the pipes. I could feel the heat of the person through the wall. I could hear his breathing. Time stretched. I remember counting because that is the only thing you can do when you are deafened by fear. 1, 2, 3. The door is still locked. Where's my phone? My phone was in my pocket. Of course it was. I had tried to be calm. I had tried to be clever and not attract attention. I wanted to send a text that said BRB, doing something stupid, but the keys were at my wrists and my fingers stuck to them. Then a sound I will never forget. The bathroom's main door slammed and the latch clicked open from outside. Heavy boots, not rushed but purposeful, thudded across the concrete. I could hear someone moving toward the building's exit. I held my breath until my lungs hurt, then peered out between the stall door and the gap so small I could barely see. A hand, a sleeve, a flash of green. A hood, dark and wet, moved past the rim of the door where the light spilled in from outside. The hood belonged to a green sweatshirt, tall, broad. The man moved fast and then slower, like someone checking angles. I didn't decide to leave. I reacted. I moved. I unlocked my stall and slid quietly to the farthest corner. Then I made a break for the back door by the sinks. I've never been more thankful for a knot in the handle or a vice grip of design that allowed me to slip my hand around the latch and make it feel like turning a key. I pressed my back to the cool metal and eased the door open. Outside, the night hit me like a bucket of ice. I wanted to run. I ran. My shoes slapped the pavement. I dove into the passenger side of my car, fumbling with keys, and started the engine like someone had lit a fire under me. As I pulled away, I saw him. Tall, green hood up, sprinting from the bathroom toward the tree line. He moved like a person who knew where to go. He didn't look back. He had those long, exaggerated strides that made him look almost like he was gliding. There was a second car at my right, parked too close. Headlights were off. It hadn't been there before, or it had been, and I just hadn't noticed. I drove away as fast as the speed limit allowed and didn't look back. The radio was on for a long time, some absurdly upbeat song that grated against the adrenaline in my chest. I told myself I was fine. I wasn't fine. Weeks later, I still checked rear-view reflections more than I should. Months later, I changed routes, avoided certain rest stops, and found myself less trusting of doors that should have been simple. I never saw him again. I never knew his intention. For all I know, he was a guy trying to scare people for fun, or he might have been something else. I never met him, never spoke to him. The pieces never clicked into a whole. It left me with a permanent itch in the back of my neck. If the locked men's room was a signal, I didn't want to know what it signaled. I didn't tell many people then because I felt embarrassing admitting how afraid I was. It's easier to brag about close calls than to admit you hid in a stall and prayed no one would notice. If that made your skin crawl, wait until you hear what happened when a father brought his whole family. We drove hundreds of miles the summer they were little. The plan was simple: cross-country road trip to see family, stop at quirky roadside attractions for the girls, and camp when it wasn't raining. The dad who told me his story, I'll call him Mark, because that's what he picked when we traded notes at a gas station 2 years later, was the kind of guy who keeps a playlist for the kids, a cooler with snacks, and a little binder in the glove compartment, with emergency numbers written in his wife's neat handwriting. He wasn't reckless. He was careful in a way that should have made him safe. They had left late to avoid the heat. The daughters were asleep in the back seat, blankets bunched under chins, the wife dozing in the passenger seat. Bilbo, the dog, was curled in the cargo area like a little furry biscuit. They'd been on the road for hours. Mark was near the end of his shift behind the wheel when one of those gas station lights in the distance looked like an oasis. He took the exit without drama, parked next to a semi that looked like it could have driven out of a different decade, and told the wife he would take a quick bathroom run. It was around midnight, the type of midnight that feels like a different day entirely. Mark said their rest area looked functional from the outside: concrete, flickering street lamp, vending machines that hummed. But something about the air made him pause. It smelled like burnt plastic. Not the sweet smell of a melting cord, more like something electrical was cooking somewhere behind the walls. There was also a faint, sickly sweet undertone he couldn't place. He told me how Bilbo sat up and growled low in the back, folding his ears to his head as if he'd smelled a storm on the horizon. Mark went into the men's room. The lights were on, but a few were dim, and one in the corner buzzed like a wasp. He said his boots echoed on the tile in a way that made the bathroom feel larger than it was. He washed his hands. The faucets made that metallic thwack that public restrooms do when someone hits them too hard. For a second he thought he heard breathing, deep, slow and close, like someone exhaling into their palm. The sound seemed to come from the doorway. Then the lights went out, not all at once. First a bulb popped and guttered like a candle trying to fight the wind. Then the overhead panels went dead, and the bathroom fell into a kind of dense, blue-black something that made the edges of his world vanish. In the dark, the air felt heavier. The smell grew stronger, and he had the immediate animal thought that something was slick and wrong in the wiring. He reached for his phone, thumb finding the blind-lit screen, and turned on the flashlight. The beams were narrow and trembled as he moved. Through the glass in the mirror, he saw movement, a shape at the doorway that didn't belong. At first, he thought it was someone leaving. People did that sometimes, stepping into the light of the hallway and then out. But the shape lingered. Then the figure was there, in the reflection behind him. He could see the outline of a bald head, bald and oddly smooth, wearing clothes that looked like they belonged to a different era. It was like a coat someone might wear in a period film, the kind of thing that doesn't fit at a 2000s rest stop. Mark turned slowly. The doorway was empty. The shape in the mirror was still visible. Through the flashlight's jittering beam, he caught the glint of a face turned not to him, but to the mirror. The man in the reflection had a sort of vacant look. His eyes were open but unfocused, as though he were seeing something else entirely. Then the man said, "It's good to see you again." The voice was soft, not friendly, not threatening in an obvious way. It sounded personal and old, like someone greeting a familiar shape in a dream. But it came from behind Mark, in the mirror. The effect, Mark said slowly, was of being watched by something that didn't belong. Bilbo went ballistic in the back of the car. He started barking and clawing at the hatch as if he could tear it open with his paws. He whimpered and then dug at the door in a frenzy, nails scraping like someone trying to get out of a window. Mark spun. The doorway was empty. He checked the stalls one by one. Empty. The sinks were vacant. Where had the man gone? How had he said that without being there? Was there another hallway? Was there a maintenance closet? The answer was nothing he could find. The whole place seemed to fold back into itself, like a picture whose corners were being erased. He told me he left, and that left felt too small a word. He drove nearly a mile down the road before he could call his wife and tell her to move the kids away from the rest area. He sat in the car and watched Bilbo panting in the rear view and tried to make sense of the voice in his head that said, maybe it wasn't meant for me. Maybe it was meant for someone else. When he went back with a flashlight and 2 other drivers to check, there was no sign of anyone. No footprints in the dust outside, nothing to explain the smell, the lights, or the voice. He was a careful man. He checked everything twice. The one concrete thing he had was the memory of the words, "It's good to see you again," and the way Bilbo reacted, which to him felt like proof that something had been there that shouldn't have been. We sat in the gas station's neon glare while he finished the story. He told it like a man reluctant to make himself a hero. There was no bravado, just a recorded tremor in his voice when he remembered Bilbo's nails on the hatch. He still dreams about that mirror sometimes, he said. It was like a window into something else that didn't belong at a rest stop. I asked him if he reported it. He did, to a gas station attendant and to the state police the next day. The attendant shrugged in that particular way of people who've worked nights forever. The police took a report and filed it. There was no follow-up, not for lack of trying, but because there wasn't anything to follow. No video, no footprints, no camera angle that showed a doorway being used. The whole episode the police labeled unverified, which felt to Mark like a word that explained nothing. We talked about all the boring, practical reasons that could have caused it. Wiring issues, hallucination from fatigue, or someone playing a prank that went too far. None sat right with him. The vacant look in the man's eyes in the mirror, a man who both was and wasn't there, did not look like a prank to someone who had seen it reflected. Bilbo's anxiety wasn't a joke either. The dog wasn't faking. As Mark's voice trailed off, the vending machine near the pumps hummed a small mechanical lullaby. It was the kind of equipment hum you ignore until you can't. He said his family still stops at rest areas, because what else can you do when you're traveling with kids? But their stops are shorter now. They park where the light is brightest. Bilbo sleeps inside the car instead of in the cargo area. They use stations with cameras and attendants who visibly linger. Comforts maybe, but nothing that dissolves the feeling that some places collect strange things at night. That was where our conversation hung for a while. An unresolved image of a man's face in a mirror that might never be explained, a dog that knew something before the humans did, and the small rituals families pick up after experiences like that. It was hard to argue with the instinct that nothing about that night was normal. One more story I had planned to tell that evening starts online. It begins with loneliness and swiping, a FaceTime that seemed like a validation, and an impulsive decision to meet at a quiet rest area. If the first 2 made you squirm because the threat felt random and anonymous, the third one will feel worse because it's a trap built from something like trust. I matched with Bianca on a Tuesday. It was the kind of match you relieve yourself with a finally. Her pictures were bright, casual, coffee shop, a bookstore, laughing at something off camera. She FaceTimed me the next night and we talked for an hour. That call felt real. Her laugh matched the photos. Her voice wasn't too guarded or rehearsed. When I asked if we could do a quick check, video proof just to make sure, we did it. She was in the car, she said. She was close by and thought it would be nice to grab a coffee. We messaged casually for a few weeks. I told myself I was taking it slow. Then one night she sent a message that changed the trajectory. She was visiting a friend, she said, but she was in a place that wasn't great and suggested we meet at a rest area for a quick hello. A rest area. She said it was neutral ground, simple, no pressure. The part that should have clicked into caution didn't at the time. The part that clicked was the hunger for company after long weeks of being the guy with awkward dinner plans. We picked a rest area that was halfway between both our places. It was off the interstate, the kind that has a couple of cheap benches and a weathered picnic table. She said she'd be behind the building for a minute because her friend was on a call. "I'll be right there," she texted. I said, "Fine, meet you where the vending machine casts a shadow." I remember the way the lot looked when I pulled in. The vending machines were slightly sunken into a concrete pad. Behind the machines there was a knockdown path into a little stand of shrubs. If I'd been paying attention, if I'd read too many news stories or spent more time watching my gut, I would have seen the problem. The path was narrow, and the shadow behind the machine was deeper than it should have been. But loneliness is its own kind of blindfold. I waited where my headlights folded the pavement into a small, safe rectangle. The air smelled like warm asphalt and motor oil. My phone's battery read 34%. I paced, texted, checked the clock. She texted that she'd be out in a minute. Another minute. A car pulled up a ways down the lot and idled, then drove off. I told myself that the other car was probably someone else. People came and went at rest areas all the time. Then a shadow moved behind the vending machine. At first, I thought it was her friend stepping out. It looked like a person, tall, broad, but I couldn't see a face. My chest tightened. Then my phone buzzed with a message from her number. "Where did you go?" I was confused. She'd said she'd be behind the building. I was literally in my car, in the parking lot, where we agreed to meet. The message was weirdly casual. I wrote back that I was still there. A few seconds later, the number sent a new message. "I guess I'll get you next time." I still have that message. I screenshot it before I did anything else. The sentence was so off-note, like a teaser from a bad movie. I tried calling the number. It went straight to some deadline. Later, the police told me it was untraceable for a while. Whatever service it was, it didn't register in routine checks. At the rest stop, the shadow peeled out from behind the vending machine, and there was someone tall and not the Bianca I'd FaceTimed. The proportions were wrong. The person looked too long-limbed. Their head was bent forward in a way that threw the bones into odd angles. They watched me like someone choosing whether to pick up a dropped coin. For a moment I froze, because what else do you do when a stranger who isn't your date appears and you have a message in your phone that says, "Where did you go?" He, or it, didn't come closer. It waited in the way a person waits when they're savoring a moment. The weird thing was how ordinary the rest area looked around them. A couple of trucks, a moth-eaten billboard, a lamp-post buzzing. The figure's presence made the ordinary elements feel staged, like a diorama in which the only animate part had a plan. I left. I don't want to make this into a movie moment where I'm cunning and escape artfully. I got into my car, called a friend, drove to a gas station with video cameras, and asked the attendant if anyone else had reported a weird person. He shrugged and checked his footage, but by the time we got into the office, the lot was empty. The footage showed nothing suspicious. The area behind the vending machine looked empty on camera. Sometime later that week, I got another message from the same number. "I guess I'll get you next time." The words can be read in ways that make us all imagine worst-case scenarios. I told the police. They said they would check the number. Their reply was, gently, that traceable numbers sometimes lead nowhere. They recommended reporting the number to the carrier. They told me to block and delete. They encouraged me to meet in public places when I met people. Solid advice, but there's a coldness in a recommendation that reads like a pamphlet. I couldn't shake how staged it felt, how the vending machine, the shadow, the precise insistence to be behind the building, those details lined up like a trap someone set using someone else's longing. Maybe it was nothing more than a prank. Maybe it was a guy who liked to send men into a panic and had a lousy sense of humor. Maybe it wasn't. I never met Bianca in person. The FaceTime told me who she seemed to be for a night, but someone used that to make an appointment, to unsettle me. I live with the possibility that others were used similarly. There are threads that knit these three stories together, a sense of normalcy that gets cleft by a small, uncanny detail. The way public spaces at night shrink you into yourself, the way we carry our fears like extra weight on the drive home. The rest area is, in theory, a safe, neutral ground. In practice, at odd hours, sometimes it's an island where things happen that don't make sense. I want to pause here, because these stories are easy to rush through if you let nervous adrenaline narrate. But they're also thinking points. The man in the green hoodie might have been anything from an opportunist to a predator. The bald man in the mirror might have been a prank, or a hallucination, or something in between. The Bianca thing might have been an elaborate catfish, or a stranger testing boundaries. None of these accounts is a closed case. No one was definitively proven guilty of anything in a way that would make a headline. The terror in each comes from the unknown. There are small things I did afterward that helped in practical ways, and I'll get into that. There are also things I didn't do because I didn't know better, until the shove of fear taught me. But before that, I want to be clear. If you have ever felt watched in a rest area, or met someone who later made you uneasy, or if your dog reacts to a place before you do, you are not overreacting. That instinct is an early warning light, not a moral failing. Now I want to pick up Mark's story again and dig into the mirror detail, because it was the part that gnawed at me most. He told me about the way the man looked in the reflection, and there's a piece of the night that, if you'll let me keep you here a minute, sits like a burr in my memory. He said the man didn't seem to be looking at him, he seemed to be looking through him. Which begs a question: what are we actually seeing in mirrors at odd hours? Are they reflecting the world as it is, or as it could be? I don't mean that philosophically, I mean that practically. The conditions of light, the angles, and the human brain are a lousy mix for reliable testimony at midnight. But Mark's account had a few concrete things that made it harder to dismiss as tiredness. First, he smelled it, a smell like electrical burning, not a smell imagined after the fact, but something that made Bilbo act up. Dogs have a different register for danger and strange things. They pick up things our minds discount. Second, the man's posture wasn't casual. If it had been a prank, it was an odd one, staged like a tableau. Third, when the lights came back on, the tiles were clean. No one had been there. The air felt normal, as if the rest stop had rewound. We started to theorize at the gas station. Not because we are conspiracy-minded, but because humans don't deal well with ambiguity. We throw threads out and hope one catches. Could it have been someone who spoke into the mirror from outside a hidden space? Could there have been a maintenance panel behind the mirror? There were logistical possibilities, and then there was a stack of reasons nothing added up. The police noted the same. Nothing to follow up on. That's a short, disappointing sentence when you want answers. Mark's daughter asked once, months later, if the man from the mirror had been a ghost. Mark laughed, not the joking kind, but the kind of laugh you use to fold a terrifying idea into a box. He told her some stories about their trip, make good campfire material now. They do, but some nights the memory wakes him up. The dog is still skittish in certain parking lots. That's where I want to stop for a minute and let the images sit. Muddy footprints between bathrooms, a locked men's room, a man in green sprinting into the trees, a face in a mirror saying, "It's good to see you again," while a dog tries to tear the hatch open, a dating app screenshot that ends with, "I guess I'll get you next time," and a shadow that doesn't match your FaceTime. These details are small and mundane on their own, but stacked together they make an outline of a pattern. I will come back to practical tips and to the last part of the Bianca story, and I will finish Mark's account because it has another detail that tightened the knot in my stomach. For now, take a second to check your doors. Look up from your phone the next time you pull into a rest area, and remember that sometimes ordinary places hide very strange things. There was one more thing Mark told me before we left the gas station that night, something small and stupid seeming, that when I heard it, tightened the knot in my stomach into a loop. He said he went back to the rest area a week later at daylight, just to look, to prove to himself that whatever had happened could be explained. He brought a flashlight like you do when you're trying to see into closet corners, and he walked every inch of that bathroom like a man taking inventory. Everything looked ordinary in the light. The tiles were clean, the flickering bulb had been replaced. No footprints, no secret doorways. He ran his fingers along the bottom of the mirror frame because sometimes, he said, people press their palms on things without thinking, and he wanted to see if there was a smudge or a fingerprint. There was nothing, except for one tiny thing no one else would notice unless they were looking for it. Along the edge of the mirror, about chest height for a grown man, there was a faint streak of something that smelled faintly of bleach, and something else Mark couldn't name. It was almost like someone had tried to wipe their hand away and not finished. It washed off with a single swipe of a paper towel at the convenience store, but he swore to me he remembered the way it caught the light. It didn't prove anything. It wasn't evidence. It was just a mark, inexplicable and small, and when you don't have answers, even a mark feels like an answer somebody else left and then erased. That, more than anything else, is what he carried. Not a resolution, not a suspect, just a memory and a smear he'd expect to find every time he imagined the mirror in the dark. I keep thinking about that when I imagine the way small places collect strange things. A single mark on metal, a pair of muddy footprints between bathrooms, a shadow behind a vending machine. These are not screams. They are quiet, personal signals that something isn't right. They don't make headlines. They make you change routes. Back to Bianca, because that story didn't end at the gas station, and because, even months later, a tiny digital line in my phone keeps pulling at me. I kept the screenshot of the message. People told me to get rid of it. People told me screenshots were dramatic. I kept it because, evidence or not, it mattered that someone had written those words to me. I guess I'll get you next time. The police ran what checks they could on the number. The number, for whatever technical reason, registered as dead or untraceable in their initial sweep. They filed a report, made a note, suggested I block and report the account, and advised the usual safety steps. Meet in public, bring someone with you, let someone know where you are. Those are not bad suggestions. They are useful things to do. They are also, in an uncomfortable way, a shrug when what you want is the person behind the message to be found and explained. I called the carrier myself later because that felt like action. The carrier's line said the record was incomplete. They recommended the police route. A week later, I got the second message. Same sentence, same thin punctuation. I saved it and forwarded it to the detective who'd taken my report. He wrote back with the kind of line you get from people who are practiced at being empathetic without promising miracles. We'll keep an eye on it. Please contact us if you get anything else. That night, I deleted the dating app I'd been using. I told myself it was because of the person behind the vending machine. I told myself it was because being lonely after a year of awkward dinners was an invitation to poor judgment. The truth was, I deleted it because it felt like maintenance, like shoveling a space in the life I'd let get cluttered. I replaced it with something else that told me I was trying to be safer. More daytime outings, coffee shops near campus security cameras, group meetups, a friend on speed dial if I was supposed to be seeing someone new. None of that is dramatic. It is just ways to tilt the odds. Months later, when a message arrived again, this time from a different burner number but with the same tone, I turned it over in my head until it fit. Was it a prank? A mismatched attempt at flirting gone wrong? An effort at intimidation from someone who enjoyed the small control of making another person look over their shoulder? The lines could be read all sorts of ways, and since I didn't have more information, every reading felt like a private horror movie I was writing in my head. That is how fear compounds. Small, ambiguous events are fed to the imagination and grow larger than they probably are. There are a few things I learned from that night that I want to be blunt about. Small practices that might not make you bulletproof, but that will make the odds a little less likely to favor being surprised in a dark place. First, park where there are lights and other people. It sounds too obvious to say, but there's a difference between being at a rest stop under a lone lamp on a hill and being at one where the lot is livelier and the walkway by the restroom is visible from multiple angles. If a place has a single dim lamppost far from doors, it is not your friend. Second, if someone suggests you meet behind a building, at a path that is narrow or hidden from view, or somewhere that requires discretion for no good reason, don't go. Neutral ground doesn't mean out of sight. A neutral ground is a well-trafficked cafe, a public square, a place with cameras and other people around. If a personality asks for privacy as the first thing you do together, that's a red flag, not a romantic overture. Third, keep your phone charged and your location shared with someone you trust, at least for first meetings. There are apps and built-in features that let someone see you in real time. These don't prevent every bad thing, but they create a breadcrumb trail. Send a screenshot of the person's profile to a friend, show them the FaceTime, and, this is important, trust their reaction. An outside perspective sometimes sees things you want to ignore. Fourth, when you can't avoid stopping at an isolated place, lock the doors, use the restroom doors nearest the main lot, take someone with you if they're awake, and park so your car is in plain sight. If you have a dog, let the dog stay with you in sight. Dogs pick up what we sometimes overlook. Fifth, preserve evidence when you can, without putting yourself in danger. Screenshots of messages, photos of suspicious footprints, notes about times and descriptions. These are useful for police reports. They are not drama, they're records. But don't become a hero. Your safety matters more than proof. Sixth, be kinder to yourself than you would think necessary. If you leave a situation and feel embarrassed, remind yourself embarrassment is not the same as irresponsibility. Fear is a caregiver. It keeps you alive. It is not weakness. I won't pretend these tips make me brave. I still flinch at the sound of a latch. I still pull into lots under brighter lights. I still get a rhythm in my chest when a message arrives that isn't expected. That's the honest part. Experiences like these change you in ways that are inconvenient and sensible at once. They teach caution the hard way. When I look at the three stories together, a pattern appears, even if you don't want to call it a pattern, because pattern implies intent, and we don't always have proof of that. Still, isolation, small details that don't make sense, and the way strangers can use normal things, bathrooms, mirrors, vending machines, to do something they'd never do in a crowded place. The human mind fills in blanks fast, but sometimes the blanks matter more than the line of the drawing. Another thread is that animals notice things we miss. Bilbo's fussing in Mark's story was not a decorative detail. Dogs operate on a different axis of attention. If a dog acts up, pay attention. It isn't superstition. It's a sensor somebody else forgot to give you. And there's deception as a tactic. The Bianca scenario wasn't violent in any documented way. I never met anyone who stated otherwise. But it was a manipulation of trust. A FaceTime can feel like verification, but television show verifications and instant bonds are not substitutes for caution. People can and will use the illusion of intimacy to get close enough to unsettle you. I don't want this to feel alarmist. Rest areas are built for us to use. Most people you see at a rest stop are doing nothing more interesting than stretching, grabbing gum, and checking directions. The point is not to make you afraid of the world, but to make you aware of small practices that keep you safer. A few practical things I did after all of this, and that I recommend without drama. I started carrying a portable charger. It's a small, cheap thing that gives me the ability to call, light, or record if needed. I made a first stop rule. When I'm traveling alone at night, I stop only at rest areas that show signs of occupancy. Multiple cars, an attendant, working lights, and if possible, visible cameras. If I have to use a facility that isn't like that, I get in and out as quickly as possible and park in the most visible spot. I travel with a small list of emergency numbers in my phone's lock screen message. It doesn't change much, but if I ever lose battery and someone helpful finds my phone, they can contact someone. I learned to tell a story about a friend meeting me in 10 minutes, even if it's not true, because making yourself look less alone is sometimes a better strategy than explaining your truth to a stranger. I stopped trusting a face alone. Verification is more than a 2-second video. If someone insists on a secluded meet right away, it's okay to say no. It's okay to ask for a phone call instead of a meetup. It's okay to be boring and cautious. People sometimes ask me whether they should stop traveling at night altogether. That's not practical for a lot of folks. What I would say is, don't let your guard be an afterthought. Plan your stops. Share your planned route. Check news or community groups for safe rest areas. None of this is theatrical courage. It's practical adjustments that preserve freedom and reduce the likelihood of a small, weird thing becoming a worse thing. I still get asked about the men in green and the man in the mirror and the message from Bianca. People want closure. I want it too. There are nights I imagine them as small crimes that never fully coalesced, and nights I imagine them as pranks that went too far. There are times when I picture them as random edges of the night world that nothing human ever cleaned up. But the honest truth is this: unresolved moments are sometimes the scariest because they refuse a narrative. The brain likes stories that end with a reason. Real life rarely obliges. You learn to live with a question mark in the passenger seat and keep driving anyway. If you have a rest stop story, whether it's a weird mirror, muddy footprints, or someone who made you feel watched, I'd really like to hear it. Tell it in the comments, but please leave out identifying details. No names, no license plates, no specific addresses. The point here is shared caution, not witch hunting. Tell where you were in broad strokes and how it made you feel. If you have tips that helped you feel safer after something strange, share those too. If you found this useful, or if it made you check your doors, consider subscribing. I put these stories together so we can learn from each other's odd, unresolved nights. Hit like if you want more real encounters like these, and tell me in the comments, have you ever felt watched at a rest stop? What did you do? No identifying info, just the experience. I'll leave you with one last detail that keeps replaying in my mind. When I pulled away from that first rest area, the headlights of the second car had stayed off, and the man in the green hoodie didn't look back. He didn't need to. The rest stop was a small stage, and for a few minutes someone else had reset the scene. That image, it is ordinary enough to be believable, but strange enough to be unnerving. It lives in my rearview. Drive safe. Keep your lights on. Trust the things your dog notices, the hairs on the back of your neck, and the small, uncomfortable truths that make you change your route. Those instincts are a kind of map, imperfect, but better than none. Thanks for listening. Share your story below, be careful out there, and I'll see you in the next one.